Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Mosaic podcast. It's interesting to a guy that about 6 months ago didn't even know how to do a podcast, that not only are we on our 90 something episode of the Mosaic podcast, but I've also started another whole nother podcast, which is 50 Conversations with 50 Strangers, that is already in the second season. So I have about 75 calls there too. So I don't know what happened to me, but amidst this coronavirus where nobody's speaking to anybody publicly, it just became a platform to open up dialogue with people. And I'm loving it. And I'm loving it for a number of reasons, not only because is it enriching my life to get to know people in the way I'm getting to know people and to meet people that I would never meet before, but it's enriching my life by giving people a platform for them to be able to speak and say what's on their mind. My guest today is somebody that I met through a group that we're both a part of. And the group is really dedicated to creating conscious, good media. Because in the world we live in, so much of our media it puts us at arms with each other. And so there was a question board, and we responded, and I saw the way she responded. Somehow I reached out to her, and we just had one of the most delightful conversations for people who don't know each other. She gave me counsel on how I might do this 50 Conversations with 50 Strangers, because she is a director of documentary films, which is what she's been doing lately. And I felt like I just died and went to heaven, because here's this, when people do something great and you meet them and you don't do it great, you feel like you've got the key to the heavens. And for them, it's sort of what they do. So they may or may not think it's as great as you think it is, but I just admire so much the work that she's done. Let me give you a little bit of her history. I'm probably going to mess up a few words because we'll see how it goes. But Trina Bardusco is an American Venezuelan who is passionate about innovative storytelling, championing multiculturalism, diversity, and content for women. She has written, directed, produced, and co hosted a total of 9 web series, and for and about women in both English and Spanish. So you can imagine my excitement just from that one paragraph of having met her, with what I'm doing with Mosaic and what I'm doing with 50 Conversations. I just felt like a little kid in a candy store. And I'm just going to go on a little bit. She's also co-pioneered HBO's Latina's original award-winning series Habla, and for over a decade has given a platform to Latinas living in the US, Latinas from all walks of life, including dozens of celebrities who share their personal stories. Her latest project, Going Solo, is a documentary series with a distinctly feminine take on the impulse to travel. Blending bold storytelling, far-flung locals, and spirited exploration, we follow Trina as she takes a walk, a twirl, or a ride in another's shoes, seeking passion and excitement in each unique form of cultural expression. Wait for this now. Trina began her career as a Fulbright scholar. A Fulbright scholar, you know how rare that is to get a Fulbright scholarship? And if I get the name of this word right, I will be so proud of myself. Of ethnomusicology in Spain in 1999 for her project Flamenco Duende. Probably didn't say it right. And Deep Song. She soon traded the library of her first readily available DV digital cameras and started documenting gypsy flamenco singer Luis Aguianto. Aguiete. Luis who?
Luisa Agujeta. Yeah.
So totally off the mark. You can see this gringo from, you would never know I'm married to an Argentine. The lead to her debut documentary, I'm the Tourist, where she began experimenting with immersing herself in a way of life markedly different from her own. When I asked her to tell me what she would say to the world if the world would listen to her, she said something very simple but very profound. Everybody is somebody to somebody. And she told me she came upon that on the plane ride that she took to where she is now in Denver. It is such an honor to have in this room with us today on the Mosaic podcast, Trina Bardusco. Trina,
Hi,
welcome.
Danny.
Welcome to the Mosaic podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like I'm speaking to this elevated soul. You have the godlike beard and all this wisdom. So there's all kinds of light coming out of you, Danny. Thank you for having me and for that praise.
Well, it's only just, this is all a green screen. I'm just an old guy sitting in California. No, I'm teasing. It's funny you should say it, because my stepson had his friends over to the house one time, and then they went out to get, something to eat together. And one of his friends looked at him and he said, "Your stepfather reminds me of God." So he came back and I said, "So then tell him act accordingly around me." No, I'm just teasing. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm glad to be with my family in Denver. It was a surprise visit. We had an emergency, a crisis, a health crisis, and but now everything's okay. And that's where when I was on the plane, I thought, with COVID, and you get there and you're afraid and you're sitting there with your mask, and I started really taking a look at the people around me and thinking about my family, thinking about me taking this trip and all that it implied, and my family member here needing attention. And I just started looking at them and thinking, this looks like a nice woman, and this one, and then it just came to me, everybody is somebody to somebody.
Yeah.
And I think that living within the times that we're living in, it's a good perspective. If you cannot put yourself in other people's shoes, think about what other people mean to you, and perhaps through that connecting the dots of empathy, it just really brings it home that we're really all in this together, and everybody's somebody to somebody.
I love that. With that in mind, and I don't want to dwell on this too long because this isn't a political show in any way, shape, or form. But today, as we are recording this, I have it, and I'm recording something on the television, because today a historic moment is happening. Joe Biden, the Democratic presidential presumptive candidate, has selected as his running mate Kamala Harris, which is the first Black, Asian, or Indian candidate to run for vice president. And I just wondered, it's a historic moment. No matter what side you're on, no matter what part of the place of women in society, the place of color in our society, is really for us to get to a place where years ago we had Barack Obama, which was a huge, I remember to this moment, the moment when he was elected, and how I felt just as a human being for just the turn of what that looked like. And this is another one of those moments where a Black woman is in. And I'm wondering, as a woman who's worked with documentaries, who's worked with people, what are your feelings around that, if you have any?
Yeah, I do. And I want to take it a step further, because I think that when people always refer to Obama as our first Black president, right? And Black. And I kept on thinking, I saw a photo of his mom and she was pretty white.
Yes.
And I feel like we often in America, we forget the nuances of our ethnicity or our color or our backgrounds. And I always felt like, well, is it too complicated to say that he's biracial?
Yeah.
Or that he has 3 continents in his minds, that he's Hawaiian, like all the things that he brought to the table with that. And I think the same thing is happening with Kamala, is that she's from the Caribbean and India and from India, kind of that mix already, which is pretty rich. And then I don't know all the details of her background, but in my mind, who I had the privilege in growing up in South America with an Italian household with my American mom, I see the world as, well, this just makes her all the more interesting and all the more well-rounded and having these different perspectives. So it's not that I take issue with saying Black, but would you really call her an African American?
No.
And then, so I think the step further is to speak a little bit more about these nuances and maybe these grand titles. Yes, it's important that she's a woman, but I feel like it's just important because she's a kick-ass prosecutor, and I can't wait to see her bashing down these corrupt people with her barrage of questions. So, but that's another thing. But in that sense, I'm glad that we have a woman there who's such a powerhouse, because she is.
Yeah.
And yeah, definitely a woman. And, you know, too bad he couldn't have been the president this time, but I think we have to look at the context in which we're living in. And I think Biden is good enough to do the job. And I think he'll do a great job, and great that he has her with him. So I think he made a good, solid choice in general, with all the possibilities of a character that's strong, that can really take a lot of this burden with him.
So it really sets like a nice background for the questions, really. I mean, Mosaic is all about, the story is not about this. It's a story about a boy who loses his parents 2 years apart on the same day. And when he asks the adults where they are, they're in a place called heaven. And it's the way he sees people as he travels on his route to heaven, and how his first perceptions of them are never what is real. But the idea and the image of a mosaic, which is almost as intoxicating to me as the story that I wrote, the spaces between the words of the mosaic, is the concept of a mosaic, which is it is all these different sizes, all these different shapes, broken pieces, whole pieces, different textures, different colors, from different geographical places, that come together to create this artistry, much like the world that we live in. Except we've stopped living in that world a little bit. We've taken a little bit of a pause on that world, it seems. And it seems like we've siloed into the white pieces coming together, and the dark pieces coming together, and the yellow pieces coming together, and the Christian pieces coming together, and the Jewish pieces coming together, and the female pieces coming together, and the male pieces coming together. There's a lot of cross currents going on in the world today. What do you say to all that?
Well, in terms of media, it's frustrating at a few levels. Well, first of all, we're all aware of the you know, what they call the snackable content, right?
Yes.
Snackable, and the Twitter length, and this, you know, people don't read, people don't want to know that, people don't. But I think it would be very intriguing if they would say Kamala Harris, da 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 da, or, you know, Barack Obama, white, black, with a Kenyan background. You know, maybe that would open, but I realize that we have limited space and we have limited time. Fine. But we are losing some of the nuances in which, if somebody saw that, they would say, wait a minute, what? How can she be Indian and from the Caribbean? Oh, Trinidad. Oh, I see. Or other parts of the, so then maybe we open up a little bit more of understanding of different cultures. But ultimately, I think that the next generation embodies that just inherently.
Yes.
And they're mixed, and so that's a beautiful thing. But why I can speak to this in my own work is that when you work with the Latino market, and now they call it Latinx, right? Have you noticed that?
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Latinx, because again, sexism, right? So if it's, you know, in Spanish language is beautiful, the Spanish language is beautiful, but you have the O and the A, right? Which makes it really hard
yeah.
for marketers and people. Like you said Latina, but it's HBO Latino. But now we've just decided to use X because that means masculine, feminine, and everything in between, you know, they, her, I don't know what you,
it's fine. Binary, Latinx, all the, everything, transgender, right. Everything.
So, and I like that because the X is like, well, what's the X? Well, guess what? White, black, Hispanic, you know, everything mixed together, all the cultures, all the countries that speak Spanish with their different accents, with their different looks. some are more Afro looking. You have the Puerto Ricans who are pretty mixed, but there's this idea of what people have in their head of what a Latino is, and it blows their mind when I speak in Spanish. Granted, I'm not a typical looking Latina, and I also have a mom from California. So,
Right.
but if I start speaking and I start interacting with them, I think they quickly forget what I look like, because it just is what it is.
Yeah.
Right. So,
And my wife just translated a book for someone from English into Spanish. And they were going to have her also read it for the audio book. And they had a committee of people. My wife is from Argentina. And the people on the committee of people were from Chile and a couple other South American countries. And they said, I lost your picture. So they said, well, you can't have an Argentine read that because it doesn't reflect the Spanish that you hear when you go to, like when you go to broadcast school, you speak a Spanish that has no dialect to it at all. And you should really have somebody. So even within the cultures themselves, I spoke to someone who was Asian, and they said, well, even lighter color Asians are treated better than darker color Asians. In the Black culture, lighter blacks are treated more respectfully than darker blacks amongst themselves, not amongst anybody else. They're envied. The lighter the skin color, the more prestigious they appear. And where did it happen in your mind? Because you've seen a lot of the world. Where did it happen that we made so many distinctions and made so many "this is better than that's" statements?
well, the accent would be the equivalent in this country of the newscasters. You want them to sound like they're from the Midwest.
Yeah.
For a long time, you couldn't have somebody with a New York accent or any other, the Southern accent. And I think the Southerners, they get booted out of a lot of things too, because their accent is so distinct. So that's nothing new. And there, of course, if you had a New Zealander giving a show or an Australian, it would totally change the tone. So I think in the US, they've tried to make it this, what they call the neutral Spanish, which is about as annoying as saying that everybody has to have a Midwestern.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with them, but that's not necessarily my culture, right? So this becomes, again, the mosaic and the kaleidoscope, and that's something that media has opened the doors now with all the YouTubeization and the specialization of people can find their niche and their group, but somehow, I don't know if that's helping us have a better conversation that isn't so black and white. And yeah, it's messy, guys. It's nuanced. It's a mosaic. You might have to take a little time longer to zoom in on things, but that's what it is. And we should be exploring that instead of making it seem like it's some cumbersome reality that we have to deal with. However, if you're doing a jingle or you're doing an audiobook that people are going to want to listen to, and you just want it to go right into the brain, there are studies about that. Well, it has to be a certain way. But for example, we hear Toni Morrison speak her book, and that's Toni Morrison, and it's the accent, it's the African-American accent. You can't tell me that you're going to have an African-American woman doing an audiobook differently. So in some cases, I think an Argentine accent would be fine.
Yeah.
But I think they don't give enough credit also to the listeners.
Yeah.
They might say, oh, it's an Argentine accent, and they might feel like it's fine for the content. So I have issues with that myself.
Yeah, the bigger question,
like
the bigger question I'm really asking isn't related to one country or one language or another. Perhaps it was because the internet wasn't around when I was growing up, and the diversity of possibilities wasn't as big. But I don't remember siloing so many different things into so many different silos. And now, with the availability of all the information that we have and the sounds that we can hear, well, when an English person wants a Spanish person to translate their book, and translating is fine, but reading their book, they have to be careful of what they do. Just like if a Spanish person would come to America, if they had a Southern person read their book, it would give a different flavor than if they had a New Yorker, right? So it's not a matter. But when did that become problematic? And how come it's problematic? Why isn't it just, wow, there's beauty in the way everybody speaks, like that everybody is somebody to somebody,
Amen. Yeah.
right? Like when did that thought change that you are nobody to me because you are not like me. You don't say your words like me, or your pronunciation isn't the way I pronounce it, or your color of your skin isn't my color, or the border that you live behind isn't the border that I live behind, or you are the way you dress or the way you identify yourself. Uh, your sexual preference isn't my sexual preference. Or I mean, my stepson went to college and they asked, sex, and he was looking. It was a drop down, and he was looking male, female, but there was transgender, there was binary, there were like 10 different categories for him, and he went like, what is this? And we had a nice discussion around the table of how important that is, to just be open to people of all different types of definitions, because it wasn't too long ago that that's what we said about women, or it wasn't too long ago that that's what we said about
Yeah.
people of color, right?
Well,
But
there's two layers to this, right? If I can express that. The
please.
first one is we need representation to make sure that we understand who we are in terms of the census, for example, in terms of who are the groups that exist and that need attention, just so we know, right? But this helps so many processes, right? To know.
Yeah.
So there's that. Then there's the idea of marketing, though, and selling to a certain group and making it appealing in a certain way, or I would dare say even pandering, right? And I think that they've lost sight of something really important, is that we all want to, I think we would appreciate authenticity in many cases more than just this amorphous kind of generic, and that's what they've tried to do with the Latinx in many cases, is make it generic. So fine, you listen to a jingle for a car and it might be okay, they want it to a certain degree to sound, appeal to the Mexicans and appeal to but a Cuban knows who a Mexican is, and a Mexican knows who a Venezuelan is, and it might just stick with them even more. So I don't know, but this is what it boils down to. In my experience with Latinx markets, they have a certain budget allotted to Latinx, and they want to bang for their buck.
Yeah,
so
they
if
reach
they start
everybody.
getting and pouring resources into figuring this out, and the Dominicans in New York and in this part of the community, and the Mexicans in LA, and so they throw a certain amount of dollars, and then when it doesn't pan out for them and they wonder why, it's like, well, maybe you should have thought that, the ones over there on the East Coast needed a little bit of a different campaign than the ones, and maybe just some slight changes, or maybe having one voiceover for that and the other, or just make it openly Mexican, and then the Dominicans might say great, or the other way. And I'm just using those as an example.
Totally.
But it's tough, because you're talking about 59 million people now.
Wow.
And they want to make everything, in many cases, Mexican, because they're 60%.
Yeah.
But what about the 40%? That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. So they're constantly rolling their eyes. Things are written in Spanish horribly, or they think that don't speak English. And I get it. It's a really messy situation with Latinos, because they might blow you out of, you might look at a very, very native Mexican looking person, and they'll speak to you in pristine English.
Yeah.
And that just blows people's minds. And then you might have somebody like me, when I was a little girl, who I spoke English with an accent when I first came to school here, because I was in Venezuela, and I was little, they put me in special ed, until one day I started crying, and I told a woman, I said, yo no soy estúpida. I was like, I'm not stupid in Spanish. They're like, wait a minute, this kid speaks Spanish. And they thought because I didn't follow the English well. Granted, that was my mom, who's a bit of a rebel, and she checked other. She didn't want to say white, Hispanic, because that's just the way she is. It's like, thanks, Mom. But it's a funny story, and it goes to show that, hey, maybe spend a little bit of time with each kid. It's not going to kill you. or maybe spend a little time with each market. I'm sure there's experts, I'm sure there's artists, I'm sure there's, so we need to think a little bit more about that. And they've spent money, but they've also wasted a ton of money that they could have gained in terms of marketing and really getting informed. And
Yeah.
that's sad. And it offends people. So there you go.
So let's backtrack a little. Tell us how you came into the world. What did your parents do? I mean, you already told us you were born in
Yes.
right.
And
But tell us,
I'm going to have
fill that
to,
in a little.
I'm going to have to plug in my uh, cord. Can we pause for 1 second?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm running out of battery. I
Okay.
know you probably don't like to edit this, but
That's okay. That's okay.
yeah. Oh, here's a cord. Okay, good.
There's this one too.
This is good. Ay, 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 Danny, I tell you, if it's not one thing, it's another.
It's okay. It's life.
It's life. Okay. But that means I have to disconnect this fabulous microphone. But maybe I can plug it back in. I'm sure it sounds fine anyway, but the mic is awesome. I love this mic. Okay, so I'm going to have to change the shot a little too. But so you want to ask me that question again?
Yes. Yeah. So let's backtrack a little bit because we jumped into the middle of the game without, normally I like to try and give a little context of how you've come in. And I ask a question that seems like a simple question, but it leads to a lot of conversation. And the question is, what did your parents do?
Oh, Danny, you've just made us go down the rabbit hole, so you don't have no idea. No, so basically my mom is an English as a second language high school teacher. She has since retired. And my father is a very interesting man in that well, I guess I have to go back to how my parents met.
Okay.
Because my mom grew up in San Francisco in the 60s, late 60s. And she left and she wanted to go see the world. And she ended up studying art history in Vienna, went to Afghanistan with a bunch of hippies. Great story. Comes back to Switzerland and is working at a bar. Meanwhile, my father's there from Venezuela. The universities were always on strike, so he went to Venezuela to do an engineering course. I think it was for elevators, for installing elevators. And brilliant man, mathematically inclined, this and that, but also was just part of that generation that they wanted to explore the world. I don't like to say hippie, let's say more bohemian.
Yeah.
For better, in that sense. And he met my mom. And
by the way, you're talking about my generation and exactly
your
the
generation,
path,
yeah,
and exactly the path that I took. So I feel very simpatico with your
oh
mom
yeah,
and
my
dad.
mom's 65.
Yeah.
69. You're 65. My dad's a little older, but so they met and they got pregnant with me right away.
Wow.
So they went, what do? You go to Caracas with the Italian family. She couldn't go back to her 1950s mom in California, nor did she want to. So they're there. My mom, that's where she realized that she's an excellent teacher. She started teaching English. And my father, well, let's just put it this way. He is what you would call before a gamer. But basically he was winning backgammon, bridge, all these things. And we would actually spend time in the Caribbean where he would win huge chunks of money back in the day.
Wow.
And then he basically, after that, he started just working with my grandfather's company that fixed fancy cars in Caracas with my uncle, who's a very talented mechanic. And so he just, after a while, but he still was always on the paper as top, winning all the bridge games. So it's kind of an eclectic mix. But my mom taught, she came back to the States, God bless her, New Jersey, very immigrant community, taught English as a second language to high schoolers. And that's where I get a lot of my empathy for different cultures, because she was also a guidance counselor, so to speak, to assess their English and where they were from, and did they even know how to use a locker? You know, are they okay? You know, so she was always an inspiration, being just very open-minded. And she did that by living in Venezuela. And my father too, he just loves life and is very eclectic himself. So those are my parents.
I always love asking that question because you very rarely get they live in the same house that they lived in when I was growing up, and my dad was
Yeah.
a salesperson. It opens up. Excuse me. And so, did you grow up a little bit like a gypsy, or were they always stationed, or were you moving around a lot? How did that? How did that?
I wouldn't say a gypsy because that's not accurate, but I will say this. I was conceived in Switzerland. When I was in my mom's belly, they went to Caracas. Then she took me to California to be born. And then when I was 9 months old, we went back to Caracas. So for me, growing up was definitely Venezuela until I was about 19, where then I went to New York by myself to do my thing. And so we were very, let's just put it this way. My father then, he had another life, and we lived, my grandmother, who's Italian, his mother, my American mom, my brother and I in the same apartment. So basically my mother was living with her mother-in-law,
Wow.
and it was just, so outside in the world, it was Venezuela. And I had an Italian grandmother who was born and raised in Italy, by the way.
Yeah.
She got to Venezuela when she was 44.
Yeah.
And my American mom. So it was just kind of a very interesting. And then of course I became a New Yorker, because that's what you do when you're mixed. You go to New
Okay.
York. So there are other mutts around. So yeah.
Yeah, because like I'm originally from Philadelphia, so when you see neighborhoods in the East Coast, you see lots of diversity in those neighborhoods. When you come out to California, you don't see a whole lot of diversity. You see maybe some Mexicans, maybe some blacks, and a large majority of white
Yeah.
people. And so like I remember I went back to Philadelphia where I was born, and they said, "So tell us about California." And I said, "The only thing that I can say to you is it's like being in a grocery store here and a supermarket there. There's just this sense of there's a small little local, not that they didn't have supermarkets in the East Coast too, but there was sort of just this cultural identity to the East Coast that I don't think the West Coast had." Um, when you went to New York, why did you go to New York? I understand you went there because it was sort of a place for somebody of diversity to go to. But what was it in New York that drew you?
Yeah. Well, I was a dancer, modern dancer. And then also I sang, and I liked theater. So I thought I would get involved in that. But then when I was there, I sang in a band or two, and that was like, wow, this is hard to deal with all of these people, mainly men, and very kind of sketchy situations sometimes. Like,
Not me,
I don't think I can do this. I don't
not
think I
me
have.
too, not me too movement men at that point.
No, this was 1993. And even
Right.
more than that, it was just something like going to a recording studio with a bunch of guys and saying, can somebody please raise my microphone? Like, I can't.
Yeah.
But that's just, everybody has their path. And then I became seriously a dancer. But at the same time, I had to work, right? I was on my own. And I said, I really need to go to university. I did. So I waited 2 years where I got involved in all these things. And as a modern dancer, I got to New York, and then I discovered belly dancing and flamenco and African dance. And I just got taken by it. And I said, well, this is amazing. So I kind of got all involved as more like a cultural explorer,
Yeah.
which ended up being what I am. So I studied creative writing. I studied Spanish literature. And while I was there, I danced in the dance company a little, but I became more of a scholar. And I thought I was going to get a PhD in performance studies, cross-cultural performance studies. But instead, I went to Spain on a Fulbright because I wanted to know about flamenco music and that singing that just rocks your soul. And I wanted to know what was behind that. And at that time, I started really getting involved with poetry and my own writing. So everything happens for a reason. All that I strived for as a dancer and a musician, and kind of made me able to receive this information and this beautiful art form, be sensitive, be able to open my ears to it and look beyond the obvious and kind of, again, nuances, because flamenco is basically gypsy mixed with Spanish folklore, mixed with Arabic and Jewish. So it's just this already a melting pot, and I could see these bits in it, and it was so intriguing. And then from there, 1999, you could buy at Best Buy a digital mini DV camera for nothing, really, for the first time ever. So I decided that I was living in an incredible experience there. I had access to these musicians that I knew I was on something special, and I just shot my first documentary.
And
Yeah.
did you have any experience with
No,
camera?
no. Well, my girlfriend Irene came from New York, who had studied filmmaking, but she wasn't really a camera person. She and I did it together. And that was a great thing because, oh, and I told my mom to send me books about how to make documentaries. So I had a box of books and I read them. I was like, I can do this. And so we kind of followed the rules, but what it boiled down to was access. And I think that the fact that I had been studying dance and that I was able to do some of the clapping, some of the singing, some of the dance, because you can't just hang out with them and not do anything.
Right.
They're going to
Right.
put you on the spot. It's a circle.
Right.
They're aware of, so you can't just be there as an outsider. You have to get involved somehow. So I was able to do that. And then my friend Irene, who's Venezuelan woman, she has kind of, she's a beautiful mix, kind of Native American features. I mean, Native Venezuelan. She looked also kind of, she blended in with them, but then there was like, well, who's this blonde chick with this other chick? And I think honestly we were women, young women with a camera. So they didn't think we were doing anything that serious.
Right.
And they weren't taking us seriously in a lot of ways, in a good way. Not that they mistreated us, but that like it allowed us to wiggle our way in. So we really were able to get, in spite of our lack of resources and experience, we got a film with some heart.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
And you know, as you say it now, it all feels like it fit into place really nicely. What was the hardest part about doing that? Because I'm sure there are people that are listening that are saying, well, hold on. How did this happen? You know, who just picks up a film, and yeah, they had access to all these people, but who just picks up a camera and never shot a camera and says, I'm going to create documentaries, and creates a pretty good film the first time out? What was the hardest part of doing that?
I think the hardest part was just capturing all the sparks along the way, all the beautiful moments. You're not always prepared. And I think that's documentary filmmaking and life in general.
Yeah.
You know, you're fishing. You want to catch that big fish, but can you will that big fish to come when you need it to? So you're always alert. You're trying to be ready for it. But it's a beautiful story because we did a whole setup, and I spent all this money and some lights, and we brought these dancers, and the dancers were fighting, and it was just terrible. Out somewhere in somebody's house in the middle of nowhere. And then all of a sudden, it was a disaster. All of a sudden, this gentleman picks up a guitar, and the singer comes out of the darkness and starts singing. And it was the most beautiful. And they were like saying, you thought that's where you're going to find Duende. Oh no. So luckily we were humble enough. I was just like, Irene, let's just forget about this. Tell everybody to go home. And we started, I said, just quietly go over there and shoot them while I try to get everybody out of here. And so it also showed us that, yeah, you can do a lot to set things up and this and that, but really what you're going to get is something different. So I think what I learned was it's okay that things don't go the way you think they are going to go.
Yeah.
And let the film show you. But it was hard. That was hard because you're on your toes and you're not always sure. And sometimes we thought that what we got was horrible.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, oh wow, well that's not bad. Well, so you have to change everything. So that's hard. But if you go with it, it can be quite rewarding.
Yeah. And did you shoot stuff and then go back and reshoot it, or you captured that moment and then you adapted it? Like I think even as I'm filming, like, you know, I'm doing these conversations, I'm doing a lot of these things. There are moments within all of them that edited out would probably be high points and something that I could bring together. But then I'm a talking head next to another talking head, you
Yeah.
know, and you just, and you see people that are good at what they do. They don't go, it doesn't seem like they go in that format. They go in a different format. And so, what would you say to people? Because this is what you do also. You consult with people to do filmmaking, don't you?
Yes. Now I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, what would you say to people who are eager to have a camera in their hand, who know nothing about it? Um, because, like I said in the introduction, when you see somebody who's good at it, it seems effortless. When people watch me do what I'm good at, it feels effortless. But if you're not good at it and you don't know what you're doing, it's effortful. What would you say to people to make it go from that effortful place to that effortless place, if there is something you can say?
I think what drives you has to be something a lot larger than yourself. And people throw that around.
Yeah.
But for example, in my case, I wanted to see Duende, which by the way is almost impossible because everything has to be in the right way. You know, it's something that happens. It's just a moment. And it's that moment where people say, ole, where just something
Yeah.
transcendent comes. And usually it happens very late at night after a lot of wine
Right.
in dark spaces. But that's not the point. The point was the exercise. And along the way, and then if we were lucky, we had some moments but really we had that bigger concept, right? If you don't have that clearly enough, like in your case, you're building a mosaic and there's something that pulls you. So I think start with something that really is a core concept or something that really interests you.
Yeah.
And then the rest just go as you go along. But this whole idea that you film without planning and you just put the camera in your hand, no.
Yeah.
No, that's not how it works. Then you have to do all the things, the shot list, the this, the that, the get here. That's a craft,
Yeah.
right? You have to keep in mind that later you have to give it to an editor, how many takes you're going to take, timing. You're basically, how do you say, you're having a dance with life in the moment. That's what I find so exciting about it. It's like you have this window, you have that window. What are you going to do with it? And it's window by window by window that opens for you. And that's it. And that's all you can do is like figure out, how am I going to get through this, and what's really happening here that's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Not what you thought.
Yeah.
Especially with documentary filmmaking, and you're usually having other people around who are telling their stories and who have their own agendas or fears or hang-ups about being in front of the camera. So how are you going to facilitate that? And it's not easy. So I say, people, if you want to make a documentary, it better be something that you can live with for a long time. And
Live
usually
with
it's something deep. It's
live
something,
with means it's going to take you a long time to work it through, or what
oh
does that
yeah,
mean?
just to
Yeah.
make it, you have to live with the footage. Then you have to maybe redo things like you said, or think of other ways this failed. How can I do it? You know, it's just, it has to be a theme that drives you,
Yeah.
or a core concept that means something to you as an exercise in itself.
What was the most surprising thing that happened to you while you through this whole course of what you've been doing?
Do you mean in my whole career, or you're still talking about the flamenco documentary?
Well, either way, you can go small or you can go large.
So say that again.
What is
Can
the
you
thing that,
rephrase?
yeah, what is the thing that most surprised you in either your career or in the making of the documentary of the flamingo?
That's a good question. I think more than surprise, I think it's the complicity that you can have with a person on camera, or the situation. I love how it all comes together, how all of a sudden, especially if you're directing or you're producing or you're putting something together that everybody's not exactly sure, but then when they're on to you and they get it, I'm always surprised at how complicit they can be in making it happen.
Yeah.
And that click is something that's very addictive too. So whenever that happens, I never take that for granted. When all of a sudden we're all playing this game together, and it just, I think maybe that's the word I like for today, complicity
I
with
love that.
others that you think are over there and you're over here. And that's always a wonderful surprise.
So if you would take that into the world that exists right now, which is full of discord. I mean, it really isn't full of discord. One of the reasons that I really wanted to do what I'm doing now is because I can't go out on the road and do what I was told to do through the Mosaic. I finished the Mosaic, it said to me, I want you to go out on the road and do what Mo did. I want you to go to towns and villages and sit on street corners and go in bookstores and go in corporate boardrooms and go in shelters and go in hospitals and go in prisons and just speak to people and just listen to people. And I want you to just film them and get a sense of what the world looks like. Um, and I can't do that right now because nobody's that open to it. But what I do notice in the room when I'm in the Zoom room talking in these 50 conversations, there is a moment where people's resistance drops, where when we hold the space for people to be themselves, suddenly who they are not disappears. And who they are not is how they came into the room. And it's a magical moment that happens, and it can be just for the briefest of seconds, but it can be for it sometimes is the rest of the conversation. But there's a certain amount of time that it seems to take. Sometimes it's instantaneous, sometimes it takes almost till the end of the conversation, which is an hour long. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but I don't think I've ever seen it not happen actually. Something's always happened in that room where people feel the space to be themselves, where they feel free enough not to have to not be themselves.
Yes.
Who are you when you don't have to be who you're not?
Wow, I am really kind of a nut. Meaning I'm very playful. I'm very creative. I'm a little sometimes out there, a little bit like a hummingbird, picking here, picking there, and just kind of flitting around. But then sometimes I can connect the dots that way. So I just think that I'm kind of I guess I'm just kind of warm-hearted. I'm sentimental. I don't know if sentimental is the right word, but I also like to get caught up in feelings or things that I like to savor, things that come into my mind and my heart.
Yeah.
So when I have my downtime, I do that. I
Why
wish I
do
had
you,
more pause for that. That's what I'd like, more pause for that, more time for that, more respect for that
yeah,
in the world for
I
all of
think
us.
I think for me in the image of the mosaic, a mosaic is made of pieces, but the pieces are connected through grout. And the grout is actually the space that connects those pieces. And it can be the finest, it doesn't have to be thick grout, but there's some space between the pieces that allows the pieces to have the space to be themselves and also to connect to all the other pieces in a way. And sometimes it's not completely separated. What do you think prevents people from being themselves straight up? Like, it's so interesting to watch when people no longer don't have to be who they're not, they become who they are. But why do you think in all the work that you've done, why do you think we just don't show up as we are?
Pressure, mainly a perception or a self-imposed. We're we're expected to perform in
Yeah.
every sense, not just if you're an actor, or it's just pressure, I think.
Is that
And
external or internal?
both. Probably the internal one is even a bigger issue,
Yeah.
right? It's like, what would happen if I just relaxed?
Yeah.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
would happen if I would really just, I think we're getting better now at that. I feel maybe even with the YouTubes of the world and this and that, but then even that becomes a pressure to be authentic and be
Yeah.
real and this and that. But perception, the stories we make in our heads, the stories we were told,
Yeah.
maybe we haven't had, mainly we don't really have our conversation with ourselves
Yeah.
to know who we are. So then we're just like, well, I don't know who I am. I don't know I don't know what I like. I don't know. And a lot of people say, well, I do know what I don't like. So that means you're spending a lot of time focusing on the what you don't like and not on what you do like, right? So
I wonder if you noticed it. I noticed it, and I'm wondering if the listeners noticed it. There was a brief little pause in our conversation right there where we touched something that it was very intimate, it was very real, it was very, and it was around the question of what would you have to be if you weren't what would you be if you weren't what you had to be, somehow, however I asked that question. And then the question that followed continued that energy, and then it started to come back to, you know thinking through why, when I asked the wrong question of why do you think that is, and we went back into a mental place that took us out of that place. But did you feel that as well?
well, I felt like I needed to back up what I meant to say by pressure. But I think we all
Yeah,
understand what that is.
yeah, I think so too.
Yes.
So if you were conducting this film, how would you bring it back to that place that we just were at? Or how would you move it forward to the next place?
I would ask, how do you feel about pressure? How does pressure make you feel?
Great. And I will ask that in a minute, but I want to pause for the listener.
Yeah.
I want to pause for the listener because life is a movie. Life is theater. Life is a constant pressure of having to perform in front of the people that we're in front of. But there are moments that we are actually ourselves, where there's no pressure to be anything other than ourselves. And when we experience those moments, there's something that's so rich and something that's so alive that transfers over the pressure to perform to be what we think we have to be. How do you feel about pressure?
I think well, like the word says, it kind of smushes us into corners of being, it can be suffocating. It can be detrimental to your health. It can impede you from having true intimacy or finding other ways of doing things when you really have all the options open to you. So basically, I just see it as this, it's like this negative weight. And we all have to deal with that, right? And I
Yeah,
think you and I
maybe.
spoke about before these metaphysical things about how we are here to overcome this illusion of
Yeah,
pressure. But we do have a gravity problem, right?
yeah, yeah,
We're stuck on this planet. We have to grow and transform and make things happen. So I can't say it's all negative either. It's just
yeah.
how we perceive it. Maybe we were wanting to do something with that pressure. Maybe something needs to come out of that pressure that we have to find the way to do it. But it can be overwhelming, and maybe we haven't been taught or groomed in how to deal with pressure. We've just been given pressure,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So
So if I were to right now lift that pressure off of you and allow you to be unsmushed,
that seems so nice. Thank you, Danny. I appreciate it very much.
if I were to do that, and not only in this conversation, but in the things that are going on in your life as well, because you're walking into a pressured situation right now in Denver too.
Yeah.
If I were to just hold the space for you to not have to be in that pressure, how would you walk into the days that follow here for you? Not from your
Well,
head,
it's
not from your head, because I think pressure smushes us into our head. And the moments that I experienced you in those moments, honestly, I think somehow you forgot what you were thinking, and you went to where you just felt, and you were and even in your question, how do you feel about pressure, went to a feeling, but then the answer came back to a thought process. I think that there's something in that, lifting the pressure off of us to perform or be something. I would love to do that for a moment in this room with you. and this isn't coaching or counseling or anything like that. It's just the experience of what we do for each other, of just holding that, like just standing like Atlas, and holding all the pressures of the world up so they're not over you, and you can scoot out and not have to be under that pressure anymore. What would that feel like?
I see myself swimming in very clear waters. That's just absolute mercy and love.
Yeah, yeah,
I feel like words can be short, but I will say this. When you are at the service of other people, you seem to have a wind at your back.
yeah.
And I feel so grateful that I can be in this position where I can actually do something for somebody else. And I mean that sincerely. It's somebody I
Yeah.
really love, that it's just like you have a wind. It's like you're getting lifted off that pressure. But I do think that when you becomes like this conversation with yourself, very stern, and you compare yourself and why are things not like this? And why haven't I, in my case, sold that movie or made that or overcome my physical limitations, etc. Then that's the pressure cooker. But getting out of yourself and just being of service with all the gifts that you have, I think that's a really good way to alleviate pressure. And I'm just speaking from my own experience right now, because
No,
I feel
totally.
this like warm and fuzzy thing, in spite of all the, what might seem like something really dramatic, is actually quite beautiful. It's like
Yeah,
cracking open something, and then, okay, so it cracked. And then what?
yeah,
The pressure, right? To use that imagery.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
cracked. And so it's vulnerable. But maybe some of the pressure got released.
yeah. One of the beautiful things to me of the Mosaic is that it taught me through just the story that there's always another way to see something. And what's particularly interesting for me in this conversation right now, because the whole conversation has shifted, it's shifted again from what I feel, right?
That's good.
And
That's a good shift.
I love I love watching, like surfing the shift, okay? Because one of the interesting places is when that wind behind you of helping another person meets the pressure of having to do it right,
Ah,
what happens? Like even in your situation in Denver,
right.
you're coming into a tough situation, but you have the wind behind you of being there to support another person and to be there for another person. In the filmmaking that you do, you have the wind behind you of telling someone else's story and having that. And then there's the pressure of selling that film, or the pressure of, will everybody be okay?
Yeah.
Or right. And so what happens at those collision points? Because I believe in those collision points is where life really establishes the way we go for the next four stanzas.
There's so many proverbs and phrases and cliches that I could come up with to answer that question, right? But I feel that really looking at the situation, like really looking at that piece of video, really looking at what you captured, or really just seeing and being there for what the situation truly is and the potential that it has in of itself, to have that possibility of that clarity will guide you. And hopefully it'll keep the wind going.
Yes.
Hopefully it'll keep the wind going behind you, because
A butterfly just flew into my room in my house here. So
what? Oh,
that's sort of
wow.
interesting.
That's so beautiful. Wow, Danny, you and I have this connection going. It's quite something.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put my cool speaker on again.
Okay.
But I think it's just cyclical, right? But it comes back to being present, be mindful,
Yeah.
let God and let go and all those things. But no, you're a player in this. you have a role.
Yeah.
You do. And just keep on making that choice
Yeah.
to be that. You're in this picture, you're in this movie. Okay, what do we do now in this movie? Right? What's the best outcome? Where's the story? Where's the love story? We need a love story in the end, or
Yeah.
nobody wants to watch it, right?
Yeah.
What kind of movie do I want to make? And that goes back to the crux of free will versus fatalism. We know these are the cards we're dealt, but we can decide I can decide right now what I want to say. I could say to you, cha 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 and woohoo, right now, and I just
Olay.
choose to do that. Ole,
Right.
and that's it, and hang up on you, right? I have the power to do that, but
Absolutely.
I don't have the power to control where I was born or what I'm doing or the behavior of other people. Or so that's the dance. That's the cosmic dance, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In honoring your time, I could talk to you for a long time, but I close up all these when they have to close up, which is unfortunately now. But I love what happened in here, because true to what happens in this room in other situations, it takes a certain amount of time. Even though we've had a conversation, we don't know each other very well, and it takes a certain amount of time to just trust each other, love each other, feel supported enough by each other, come together, connect with each other, whatever the words are that we use for something to show. I don't know if you have children. It's not even important if you have children or don't have children. But when you look at the world we're living in now, is this the world you always dreamed of handing over to the next generation?
That's a tough one, because I believe that there's some things that are much better. I think things are better than we think,
Yeah.
even though it feels like things are, whoa, falling apart. I think we're better than we think. And I think thinking that we're not better than we think is what's making us all afraid. But if you look at history, there's been plagues, there's been leaders who are just a mess, or there's been tyrants and corrupt culture and lack of integrity and ego through the roof, all those things. But I think we have to take back our power.
Yeah.
And see that this is just the human condition and the power that we have to really make a difference. Because I don't know about you, but I'm surrounded by beautiful things all the time.
Absolutely.
And I know I don't take it for granted that maybe that could be lost at any moment. I mean, I grew up in a country like Venezuela that's really beyond what anybody can imagine changed. But like we say in Spanish, igualito se baila y se goza. That means just the same, they're dancing and having a good time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, let's take off a little bit these goggles of doom and just really look at case by case by case. Because I have to tell you, and this is something that I go to Venezuela and I've been with very humble people, and they are a lot happier than a lot of the people I walk to in offices in New York with all their hoopla and this and that. And I mean that sincerely.
Yeah.
My friend Soldanela, after what happened, Maria, she met these two beautiful boys, and she said they had a bicycle that they used to share, and it broke, and they said they wanted a bicycle. She said, do you want two bicycles? They were like, no, we want one bicycle because we ride it together. Why would we want two bicycles? So it's just so charming. But really, it just comes down to that. Like, let's not look at other people and let's really look at each other and really see the beauty in a lot of the things, and not give that power away to the media, to the government, to anybody.
Yeah. It was one of the reasons that I was hinting at when I said that the book told me that it was time for me to go on the road and do the same thing. Then the virus came, because one of the things that I've seen always when I travel is people are really good and kind people, people that don't look like me, people that you would think that I would be scared of normally if I would see them on the street. They're so kind and generous most of the time. They come and offer me food. They offer me a place to stay. They ask if I need help. They ask where I'm from. They sit down and talk with me. I buy them a coffee, or we'll sit on a street corner
Yeah.
and have a bottle of wine and a loaf of bread together, and we'll just chat. And it isn't the world that the media paints, that is angry at each other and that is divisive with each other. I mean, that world exists too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But there's
But
so
we can't.
many good people in the world that are doing good things for
Yeah.
good things to good people.
We don't like the good news. It doesn't trigger all those little yucky things within us that we want
Yeah.
to somehow, or we're addicted to.
And I love how it comes circle, because we met in a good news group, right? We met in a group that they're consciously trying to create good, conscious media for people
And
to,
nuance. We came back to nuance
and
because
nuance.
look at the person in front of you, not through the lens of these. Yeah, we have to have them for affirmative action and for the census and for the media to take 2 seconds so that you understand, oh yeah, okay, boom. But do not become that, for God's sake,
Yeah.
as a human being. I mean, I beg you, please.
So you're
Don't.
leaning into the final question that I ask, which is, if you could say one thing to the world at large right now, what would it be
Well,
that you would want to say?
well, I came up with that phrase that I just, that's everybody's somebody to somebody. As simple as it can be, but, and that goes, that's about also just really realizing the complexities of each individual and the beauty and really take a look, take a look around you. Really
Yeah.
don't be stuck in that thing, don't just stare down into the phone and all that. It's great that we have all that, but really just look around everywhere you go. Just acknowledge. And I think that idea that everybody's somebody to somebody really helped me do that when I was all afraid of the virus and on the plane and the airport. Oh, these people. Oh. And it's
Right.
like, wait a minute. So
Yeah.
in general.
I love that. Trina, if people have become intoxicated with you as I have, how would they get in touch with you?
TrinaBardusco.com.
TrinaBardusco.com. And we'll put it in the show notes so that people can easily access it. I want to thank you so much for spending time with us, especially under the current
Thank you.
situations you're in. Thank you for
Yes,
carving out the time to do that.
All is well here. So I'm very happy about that as well.
Fabulous. And for those of you who listen to the show, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you like it, share it with your friends. Take the time and just tell somebody, hey, something interesting is going on in this place called the Mosaic Podcast. The way things spread is when people who like things share them with people they like. If you don't like it or you don't want to share it, that's fine too. Nobody's asking you to do anything that you don't want to do. Right?
No, and thank you for also taking this on and really taking the time to try to go beyond the usual set of questions, because let's face it, we all have great resumes to one extent to another, but
yeah,
the stories are really where our common experience lies. And so thank you for taking that upon you to work with that.
That means a lot for you to say it, because I think the resumes of people can be found on their websites, which I encourage people to go to people that are on the show to see. The stories of people that they don't talk about as freely or don't have the space to talk about as much are not found on websites most of the time, or not even found in interviews most of the time. It's exclusively for those people that can hold the space to allow people to drop all that other stuff and just allow themselves to take that moment to be themselves.
So thank you, Daniel. I think I have to go too, because I have my nephew who's 3 years old that I haven't seen in a long time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you again. And ciao. Bye-bye now.
Ciao.